This is all unfolding as a crowded race to replace Governor Janet Mills is heating up because she is running for Senate. And it's just one state where the Minneapolis shootings and the overall response to Trump's immigration enforcement has become an election flashpoint. Joining us now, Jonathan Capehart, host of MS Now's The Weekend. Susan Page is Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Good to see both of you. So, Susan, the move to Maine is to target Somali immigrants, although many of them have become U.S. citizens. Does the administration think this will help Republican candidates, or is it not about that?
Well, I don't think at the moment it's about that, because we know that some Republican candidates do not welcome these ICE tactics. We've seen national polling that shows it has eroded President Trump's own standing on the issue of immigration, historically one of his strengths. There's a Reuters Ipsos poll out that shows that his standing on immigration now 40% approve of what he's doing. That compares to 50% when he took office at the beginning of last year. There's another poll that shows that Americans by 20 percentage points say ICE is making cities more dangerous, not safer. So as we see these explosive reactions in Minneapolis and elsewhere, this is definitely a risk for Republican candidates down the ballot, I think, Chris.
And Susan's right, of course, Jonathan. There are Republicans who have to run who are nervous about this. But in Minnesota, the federal officer who shot Renee Good last week is getting legal assistance from the Republican candidate in the state's governor's race. He says the decision has no bearing on his political aspirations. But can you separate the two? You're running for governor, but you're a lawyer who's giving legal assistance to an accused shooter.
Yeah, no, you can't separate the two. This is the quintessential high-profile case, and you're running to be governor of the state, and you think the voters are going to separate your running for governor from your providing legal assistance or some kind of help to that officer? The voters are not going to buy it. And how is he going to make that? How is he going to continue that separation when he will get questions on the campaign trail from constituents, from the press, about what he believes about the case, what his positions are, what he would do if he were in higher elective office? I just think it's fanciful that he thinks that the voters in Minnesota aren't going to be able to see that he's trying to have his cake and eat it, too.
Susan, lines are also being drawn in New York's governor's race. Incumbent Democrat Kathy Hochul pitched legislation to prohibit ICE raids in sensitive places and even allow New Yorkers to sue the agency. Republican candidate Bruce Blakeman says it looked to him like the shooting victim, Renee Good, was trying to run down the ICE agent. Is this going to be, do you think, an issue that will divide in a number of these races and could play a role in deciding who wins?
Yes, absolutely. And in a state like New York, it tends to be Democratic, but not entirely safely so. I think Blakeman is calculating that if law and order becomes the issue, that could be helpful to him to be on the side of cracking down on chaos in the streets. The risk for him and for Republicans generally is if the Republican administration gets blamed for that chaos, then that could be a difficult case to make. We've got a long way to go till November, and you want to figure out whether at the end of the day, Americans feel like the right thing was done on immigration. You can understand the tactics taken, or are Americans going to be very uncomfortable with what they have seen happening on their own states? That'll vary from state to state, but I think that will be part of the calculation in states like New York.
Jonathan, there is also the announcement just this morning by the deputy director of ICE. She's resigned to run for Congress against Ohio incumbent Marcy Kaptur, posting on X, "I am proud of the work we have done to protect American families." Do you think that these races potentially are a referendum not just on ICE, but I think on Trump's determination to remake what America looks like?
Yes, midterm elections are always a referendum on the administration, and this will be the first midterms of President Trump's second term. And so that's been the conversation this whole time about what the midterm elections will say about President Trump's second term. But, Chris, I want to go back to one other thing about the New York governor's race that the Republican candidate needs to keep in mind, and I'm sure they're paying attention to this. Yes, New York State is a big state, and once you get outside of the 5 boroughs of New York, it gets increasingly red, both upstate, but also as you go along Long Island. But the primary driver of votes in New York State is New York City. And if you are a Republican and you pay attention to the million-plus votes Zohran Mamdani won to become the next mayor of New York City, I think for Bruce Blakeman, I mean, he can say what he wants about what happened in Minnesota, but he could end up galvanizing, depending on how he talks about Minneapolis, could end up galvanizing those Democratic voters, particularly in New York State, who want to register their upset with the administration even more so than they probably already will in that gubernatorial race.
Jonathan Capehart and Susan Page, thank you. And be sure to watch Jonathan on the weekend, Saturdays and Sundays at 7 a.m. Eastern, right here on MS Now.